perfect.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, Marianne, for that very gracious and generous introduction. I'm very, very happy to be with you all today and apologize that I missed the first meeting. That was my fault. Marianne did a wonderful job and I had some scheduling mix up, so I apologize. Um, but I wanted to dive right in about the work of the Fresno Commission on Police Reform. And as mentioned earlier, there were 39 commissioners that participated in this effort. And I can tell you that, Marianne asked me up front what were one of the surprises. I think what the biggest surprise for me in thinking about this work and thinking about the diversity of the commissioners, and I hope if you haven't already that you get an opportunity to go back and just look at some of the names and backgrounds of those commissioners. It for sure for me was the most diverse set of Fresnans that I think have been assembled for a single purpose since I've been in public life, and that includes my time as a police officer for just about 12 years and my time as a two-term city council member. So almost 20 years of public life in Fresno. Never seen a commission with the diversity of background that we had. And the biggest surprise is that every single recommendation passed that group. Which was pretty remarkable. Not unanimously, of course, but the fact that we got a majority of commissioners, and most of the time, most of the recommendations, all 73. And as mentioned earlier, we had 73 recommendations come out of this 120-day effort, and have all of them pass was pretty remarkable. So Marianne, I think to answer your first question, that was the biggest surprise. I didn't think that all of the recommendations would pass. So with that, I wanted to let you guys know what my biggest surprise was. And now I want to chat a little bit about the makeup of the commission and how we actually broke it down. So as I mentioned, there were 39 commissioners, which, as you can imagine, is a very, very large commission. Just on this call, we have 33 people. So if you can imagine having six more people on a commission that are on this Zoom right now, and figuring out a way to have all the diversity of opinion and people and backgrounds tackle the issues. What we decided really early on to do was to break the commissioners down into subcommittees. We felt as though in order to really get a balanced effort and to make sure we had the participation from all of our commissioners, a meaningful participation, I should say. We needed to really break the work down into 4 subcommittees. And so that would give us just about 10 commissioners per subcommittee, and every commissioner served on a subcommittee. And we broke them down like this. We had a subcommittee on police budget. We had a subcommittee on community input. We had a subcommittee on community development, and we had a subcommittee on policing tactics and policies. We felt as though those 4 subcommittees uh, had the opportunity to tackle this issue of police reform in a meaningful way. And out of those 4 subcommittees, uh, came the 73 recommendations, which the entire commission voted on as a whole to either adopt or reject them. So just to chat a little bit about what each subcommittee did, as I mentioned, the and some of them are the names are pretty obvious, right? I mean, you can imagine what the committee on police budget did, right? I mean, they went through the budget. I mean, that's fairly obvious. You can imagine what our subcommittee on community input did. Which arguably was probably the most important committee, because the Fresno Commission on Police Reform has probably the had probably the most robust community outreach that I've ever participated in, and that was in the middle of COVID. The number of residents they were able to connect to and get included in this effort was pretty remarkable, quite honestly. So I always said that they were probably our most important um, committee, because we wanted to make sure that we were hearing from a diverse set of Fresnans. And then we had the commission or the subcommittee on police tactics and policies. Again, that probably is pretty self-explanatory. You know, I was on that subcommittee, and we dealt with those things that you would see most likely in policy and tactics and what have you. So that kind of is self-explanatory. The one committee that is not self-explanatory was our subcommittee on community development. And this was a total shock to me that we ended up having this committee, this subcommittee, because it came out of one of the very first discussions that we had together as a commission. And it became apparent to me that the commissioners wanted to absolutely focus on obviously policing in Fresno as a function of law enforcement. However, they wanted to also focus on something larger than just law enforcement as it related to community safety. So what they wanted to also discuss was what are those things in our community that can make our communities safe that don't necessarily directly correlate to law enforcement. They wanted to be able to be creative about what it means to have community safety. So the Community Development Committee subcommittee, I thought was probably the most innovative idea that was birthed out of the conversation with the commissioners. So those were our four subcommittees. And I will tell you that we had 120 days worth of work. First, the Fresno City Council gave us 90 days. And I think a lot of us knew early on that 90 days was not going to be enough to give any meaningful recommendations. And so the council was very generous with us, giving us a 30-day extension. So we had 120 days to work. And I can tell you that all of those committees probably met twice a week, and for anywhere from 2.5 to 3 hours a meeting during that time period. It was a significant amount of time. I mean, the commissioners put in, probably not including meeting time, because there was always homework assignments that each committee had to undergo. They probably put in a couple of hundred hours individually worth of work. It was quite a remarkable effort by the commissioners. And I was proud, very, very proud to work alongside them because, these were a dedicated group of Fresnans and, our residents that did this unpaid, that came out with some pretty remarkable recommendations. So I always want to make sure that folks know that the time that they put in was pretty unique in a shortened time period. This wasn't over a year that they put in a couple of hundred hours. This was in a 120-day time period. So they dedicated a significant amount of their lives to this effort. So I just wanted you all to definitely know that. And I'll tell you, obviously we don't have time to go through all 73 recommendations, and I'm hopeful that you all had an opportunity to review them. If you didn't, you can obviously find it online, at the city's website. But I wanted to highlight, because Marianne asked, what do I think is actually going to happen? Because now that the commission has done its work and presented these recommendations to the city, its administration, and the police department, what do I think is going to happen? So right now, the city is developing an implementation committee. And that was one of the recommendations that our commission had. We felt like in order to continue this work, there needed to be a specific committee set aside to just do the work of implementation, not try to rewrite the recommendations, but to take these recommendations and actually run them to ground and make sure they were implemented. So I know the new, of course, mayor's administration, as was mentioned earlier, the police department and the city council are all working together to develop that implementation committee. We, as a commission, made our recommendations to them about what the makeup of the implementation committee should be, and I know that they are working on that now. But so I think that that's going to happen I think you'll be able to see some things that will be implemented relatively easy. And then some things that will take a little bit of time. And so over the next couple of years, I think you'll see that. But I wanted to highlight a few of the really important recommendations that I think I wanted to draw your attention to, because what really came out of that work were some themes about policing in Fresno, which is really important. One of the biggest themes that we saw, and again, most of this came from input from our residents, which I really am honored that the community input committee did an amazing job at connecting with thousands of residents in Fresno to receive input, which helped us shape our recommendations. But one of the major takeaways we received from the community was the idea of an oversight committee, community oversight. And so while there's some oversight that exists in policing right now in Fresno, there was widespread agreement amongst the residents and amongst the commissioners that it wasn't sufficient, that the Office of Independent Review did not have enough accountability to the community and was not transparent enough to even understand what it did. And we found that, probably some 50% of our residents didn't even know that the, Office of Independent Review existed. What you will see in one of the recommendations, and I believe it's early on in the report, is you'll see how the commissioners wanted to develop a robust oversight mechanism, police oversight mechanism, made up of citizens were accountable to the community, that worked in concert, of course, with the police department, but ultimately were accountable to its citizens. And they wanted the police auditor, as it were, to be accountable to them. So we probably, and I was on that committee that developed the recommendation for that. We probably spent, I would say almost 10 hours just debating that in and of itself. And it's a, and we presented what I thought was a pretty comprehensive, long recommendation about what that oversight committee should be, who should serve on it, how it should be appointed, and why. And again, I don't want to get into bore you guys with all of the details because we spell that out in the report, but it was an enormous amount of thought that went into that, and it was a strong opinion. One of the strongest opinions I think that we got from the community was the idea of police oversight. And so that was one of the recommendations that we put forth to the city. Another area where we had an enormous amount of strong sentiment and feelings about, not only with the commissioners, but also with the community, was the use of force policy. And I'll tell you, me being a former police officer, I certainly have personally evolved on the idea of the philosophy of use of force when it comes to law enforcement agencies. And so what you will see, and there's a number of recommendations. We went through the use of force policy, the Fresno Police Department use of force policy, and made a number of strong recommendations that really ultimately changed the philosophy of use of force to a preservation of life, which I was really proud. I'm really proud of the commissioners for working through that. And this in no way is to say that the use of force policy in its current form was inappropriate. We just found that in today's time, there is an emphasis on the preservation of life when it comes to use of force from a philosophical standpoint in policing and in law enforcement that we wanted to adopt here in Fresno. One of the most dramatic changes, I think, that came out of the use of force policy was the idea that a police officer can only use lethal force if a life is in danger. And while that may seem to be common sense, most agencies around this country don't have that threshold for lethal force. Usually, a police officer can use lethal force on what they consider on what is a violent or a fleeing felon. Case law doesn't even stipulate that it has to be a violent fleeing felon. And so we decided to take a much more firm approach and say, you can only use lethal force, meaning your gun or a lethal tactic, if there is an immediate threat of life present, which again is a dramatic change from what is currently what the policy currently states. So I think, and again, I mean, there are a number of other changes that we went through line by line in the use of force policy that are consistent with the idea of only being able to take a life if a life is being threatened. And along that idea, we really put in a number of policies that were meant to de-escalate situations with interactions with residents, as opposing to unintentionally escalating them. Um, so I think that that was another major win. And the last one I wanted to draw your attention to for the purpose of the discussion for tonight, because I also want to leave some time for you all to be able to ask some questions, is we also found that the way we use law enforcement resources is wholly inefficient right now on the part of the officer and the community. And what I mean by that is about a quarter of the calls that sworn police officers respond to are nature of homelessness or mental health. And neither one of those categories are criminal in nature. And so criminalizing a person because of their shelter status or because of their mental health, we realize is really not the best way to use a law enforcement resource. So getting law enforcement, getting police officers away from being first responders in calls that are not criminal in nature was another major inflection point in the discussion. And so one of the recommendations we made is to move away from having police officers unless there is a criminal element present. Now, obviously, we want police officers responding to calls that have a criminal nature in them, but a person that is mentally ill, by definition, is not a criminal. And and police officers are ill-equipped to handle a person that have mental health issues. There are mental health clinicians that are much more qualified to handle a person that is suffering from a mental illness. Police officers are not those persons. And the same goes with a person that may be sadly in a condition of being homeless. There are societal factors and social workers that are much better equipped to deal with a person that has a homeless status as opposed to a sworn police officer. And again, that takes up about 25% of the average officer's time that's in patrol. So we thought that that was probably not the highest and best use of the resource of police officers. We realized that we as a society have asked so much of police officers. We continue to expand what we ask them to do. And in many cases, we're asking them to do things that they are not trained to do. And this was not only unfair to the community, but it's also unfair to the police officer. It's not fair to ask a police officer to deal with situations that they are not trained and equipped to do. They don't have the proper training, nor do they have the proper equipment to do that. So we really decided that we wanted to move away from that model of policing in Fresno, where we're asking officers to put them in situations where they can't have legitimate success. We wanted to refocus an officer's time, efforts, and abilities on violent criminal activity and allow them to do community policing more, where they have the opportunity to visit with their neighbors and not, run call to call, answering calls that they're not equipped to handle. So those are kind of some of the major highlights I wanted to go over with you guys. I mean, again, there's 73 of them. I only probably covered maybe 15 or 20 in those set of recommendations, but I think that maybe you all, have an idea of the work that the commissioners did. And I can talk about any one of the 73 recommendations if you guys want to, and if you guys have some specific ones you'd like to chat about. But at this time, I think I'm done talking at you, and I wanted to open it up for questions. And I'm assuming, Marianne, maybe you help me field questions.
I will.
All right.
And
Fantastic.
so, let's see, Terry Johnson asks in the chat, if there is a domestic violence call at this time, is there an agency that will be called by the 911 person?
So domestic violence, right? So by nature, domestic violence is a violent call. So if it's not a domestic violence call, obviously we want to provide other options. But if there is a fight happening in a home, we certainly want a police officer to respond to that. But there are instances that we found of family conflict that may not necessarily rise to the level of domestic violence. And we found across the country that there are other agencies that have learned how to work cooperatively with other uh, uh, agencies in the community that may be more appropriate for working with just um, a situation of a domestic conflict. But if it is domestic violence, of course, we want a police officer to respond.
Let's see what else.
Um, Marianne?
Okay, yeah, hang on. I've got Francine. Let me go to one in the chat from Dallas. Once any recommendations are, excuse me, implemented, how are they going to be enforced and by whom?
Well, that was part of the reason, one of the reasons of the community oversight board. And obviously, once the recommendation is implemented, then the police department and the city are held accountable for that implementation, right? We were asking the police department to change their own rules and then follow those rules. And then what we are asking is for there to be community oversight to make sure that they, in fact, are following the rules that they have changed.
Francine, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to respond to Terry's question about whether there is an agency that will be called by the 911 dispatchers. At this time, the Department of Behavioral Health has two, what they call CIT, crisis intervention teams. And those crisis intervention teams consist of a trained police officer, many of them have been trained, and clinicians, mental health clinicians, who will go out together to calls that appear to be mental health related so that they can divert the outcome from sending somebody to jail, which is inappropriate, or to the emergency room, which might also be inappropriate, but rather to some mental health support agency. So those two exist already and they're very successful. I guess we need a lot more of this.
So let me just really just gently push back, Francine. We studied those two models. We're not convinced they're the highest and best use of an officer's time. And so the CIT model, which by a lot of accounts does have a lot of success, there are other models that have a lot more success that don't necessarily involve the response of a sworn officer in those situations. We feel pretty confident that a mental health clinician themselves can be the initial responder to that call. And if for some reason there is a reason to call a police officer to that call for a criminal problem, then that would be the appropriate time. So the CIT does exist, and our recommendation actually calls for a move away from that.
Well, that's interesting because I think there's a concern that if the call, which may be a mental health call, still has an element of violence in it, is it fair to the clinician to ask them to respond without the appropriate support for them to deal with, a potentially violent situation?
Yeah, and so I think there's probably, what we learned is there's probably a little bit of a gap in understanding. Most mentally ill people are not violent. And
no, I know.
Right. And so if we start from that presumption that most of them aren't violent, then sending a police officer, to that call potentially is not the highest and best use. And what we saw around the country are agencies that worked cooperatively with mental health clinicians as first responders were more than capable of, if a person that has a mental health background became violent, they were they were in coordination with law enforcement and they could actually respond to that call on behalf of something that may have turned criminal. But we found that that's a very, very small percentage of the time where a mental health professional would respond to a call and the call became violent. Very, very small. I think less than 3%.
Okay.
So I just want to,
Oh,
I'm sorry, in the Commission on Police Reform's report, there is a discussion of a program out of Eugene, Oregon, CAHOOTS program. And that is often cited, I heard it cited this week by the ACLU, really as a model kind of program where basically clinicians are sent to respond to calls where mental health seems to be the issue. However, a question in the chat reminds me, who will make this determination, and do we have that kind of qualified 911 sort of operators to do that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Marianne. So we actually referred, and as you mentioned in our report, referred to the CAHOOTS model. We asked them to visit with us, and our subcommittee had an opportunity to talk to them. And what happens is there's a complete integration of the mental health clinicians that they have in that program with the police department, including training with the dispatchers. So it really is much more of a coordinated effort as opposed to a standalone effort. So they become almost a support staff inside of the police department. So they work hand in hand.
On a more general nature, I'm sorry, Carolyn, you're next after this question. Suzanne Taylor asks, so who will decide which of these recommendations will be implemented? And who will decide if Fresno Police Department will make the recommended policy changes?
Yeah, and I made this point very clear to the council and to the administration and the police department, is that we were hopeful that they would implement all of them, and as all of you know on this call, we can only make recommendations. But we are hopeful that they implement all of them. All of them were extremely well thought out, debated amongst the commissioners. And what we sent over is a package of recommendations that we believe should be fully implemented. So we're hopeful that all of them get implemented. The police department may have to tweak some of them because of legal reasons or reasons of the collective bargaining reasons, but absent those issues, we believe all of them should be implemented. And it's going to be up to the police department and the city and the incoming administration as to which ones actually get implemented.
Carolyn, go ahead.
okay, I want to go back to the mental health aspect here. Francine and I are both on the Fresno County Behavioral Health Board, so we're aware of some of these issues. And of course, we would prefer that a clinician go out, but we also have to make sure that the clinician is safe to go out. And a mental health condition can turn very quickly and might not have time to call a police officer. So I'm concerned about the safety of the clinician. I also want to know what's the plan for recruiting clinicians and who's going to pay for them?
Yeah, Carolyn, we're not into the recruitment of clinicians, so our research didn't give us enough time to present that model to you. But I can say with a lot of confidence that, and I don't know if you, and maybe it'd be good for you all, because I see there's a lot of dialogue about that. You all should visit with the CAHOOTS people, and we visited with a couple of agencies that implement that model. They don't have that necessarily. Their clinicians don't have that same concern. They feel very capable of dealing with people with mental health issues, and there's a very, very low incident of where they turn violent, and when they do, they are coordinated with with the police department for response. So we didn't find from the organizations that actually do that work that there was as much of a concern, because we had the very same debate in our committees, but we found that as we learned more about the topic and we talked to the organizations that actually were implementing this work, that maybe our concerns were more heightened than theirs. So I would definitely and they'd be happy to chat with you all. They were thrilled to talk with us. So I think it wouldn't be difficult for you guys to maybe dive into that subject matter in more detail like we did. But we debated it for, I'll tell you, hours, frankly, about that.
Will those clinicians be a part of the police department, a part of the city? I don't understand how that's going to work.
Yeah, so from an organizational standpoint, we can't tell the police department how they should implement that program. And we wanted to leave it to them because that program is in Oregon, and from just a statewide, and this was the issue that I brought to the subcommittee. I said, listen, here's going to be the difference between Oregon and California. In California, counties actually run behavioral health, and in Oregon, the cities do. So it's a lot easier to integrate those programs. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but it does mean that there has to be some coordination and thought and logistics between the county of Fresno and the city of Fresno. Our recommendation, I believe, and whether or not we put this in there or not, I can't remember, but I do believe we recommended that the city should pay for that, to pay for the clinicians to be a part of that program, and that there should be a lot of coordination. Now, I'll tell you, they send their clinicians before they ever put them out into a response situation of over 600 hours of training. So if we just take that statistic alone, there's no way this program is going to be implemented overnight, right? You've got to be able to recruit your clinicians. You have to send them through a number of hours of training, because obviously they may be trained as mental health clinicians, but to train them to do this type of first responder work is a little more than maybe a normal therapist may get. So they have a training platform that prepares the clinicians to go out into the field, and then the coordination along with the police department and the police department dispatchers as well. So, they've been doing that program. It's a very mature program in Oregon, for over 30 years. So they offered to give us any background that, and help that we needed for implementation.
And I'll just insert a comment from Dallas. He says, de-escalation works, ask any clinician. I want to head in a different direction. Lenora asks, who decides if lethal force was warranted, and what would be the repercussions?
Well, normally, first, kind of just really quick, lethal force starts with case law. And in case law in the United States of America, you can shoot a fleeing felon, which is obviously the use of lethal force. Agencies and states have the ability to narrow that in, which is what we did in this work. We narrowed where we believe lethal force should be warranted. So if they adopt the recommendation as written, then if an officer use lethal force against their own department policy, they can be found, they can be sanctioned under the police department's own policy. From a federal level, no, they would still be within their rights if certain factors existed. But I do believe state law is also changing. So they could also find themselves in violation of state law if they violated the lethal force policy.
I just want to mention that a topic nationwide has been this issue of qualified immunity. And I think that sort of that concern plays in right here. To what extent would the officer be held responsible? And I don't know whether a change is coming on the federal stage for that issue. And certainly that would make a big difference in a police officer's choice to use force, really, of any kind.
That's right. We touch very lightly on qualified immunity, Marianne, and it is because of what you just stated. From we were a city chartered commission, and qualified immunity is a federal issue. In our recommendations, we did encourage the city council to support changes of qualified immunity at the federal level. We decided that it would not be the most productive use of our time to get into a prolonged debate about qualified immunity because we could not change it at the city level.
Kay asks, has the city council taken up any of the recommendations? And how about the mayor? Is Mayor Dyer pushing for any of this?
So the city council, most of the recommendations would not fall to the city council. The vast majority of them, but a couple, would fall to the police department and mayor's administration to implement. So the implementation work. So the city council received and adopted report and blessed it as it were. And now it is mainly up to the police department and the new mayoral administration to implement the recommended changes. Mayor Dyer has told me personally and has stated a number of times publicly that he is supportive of the recommendations and will be doing everything in his power to implement them. The new police chief has also indicated that he's supportive of the recommendations. Now, I don't want to say they're supportive of all of them, but they have said that by and large, they are supportive of the recommendations and will be working to implement them. So they have given me their personal assurances and have made those same comments publicly.
Well, it seems to me like the issue here is the implementation committee, and I surely want to know who's on that.
Yeah, they have not announced the implementation committee as of yet.
Another question, let's see, Sarah asks, I'm interested in whether this report and the recommendations was a consideration in the hiring of our new chief, and if he was receptive to the work of the committee, etc. So I think you may have answered that. I don't know whether, so did he know that this was going on before he applied for the job?
Yes, as a matter of fact, all of the candidates, I was very fortunate to be asked to sit on the hiring panel for the new police chief, and all of them, and there were 7 or 8 final candidates that I was able to interview. All of them were familiar and aware of the work. Now, frankly, when we interviewed them, the final recommendations had not been made public. There were, they obviously had the opportunity to watch the meetings publicly, and all of the meetings were recorded, as you all know. So I can tell you that the incoming chief, Chief Balarama, was very aware of the work that was going on, and he actually mentioned that in the interview panel that I sat on with him.
Yeah, he stated that he has the report sitting on his desk. I've heard him say that since he's arrived. Let's see, Murray asks, what did the commission recommend about profiling, i.e. driving while Black? And I just want to comment on that. There's a whole section there, and it's kind of, I really like the way the recommendations are put out in the commission's report, because they're kind of divided into 6 very big questions. And I would say this issue of profiling comes up first in the consideration of police culture, and of which there are a number of recommendations, and also a recommendation of improved hiring and recruitment, and kind of reframing the job so that it sounds like a good job, which it might be once some of the additional tasks are kind of relegated to other parts of the community.
This is a daily issue, and I know I was moved when I was talking to a Black educator, actually in another community, and this teacher talked about his frustrations when he drove into a white community, white area, and he faced fear over being arrested for driving while Black. And I'm sure this is an issue that must have come up in those discussions. And so where do we stand? What do the community people talk about it? The frustration is very deep. And I'd like to hear from Oliver on it. Yeah,
it is. And it's beyond deep. And I'll share with you all just a personal moment of reflection about the depth of it. You know, this work for me was extremely traumatic personally, because of my own experiences as a Black man growing up in America, being pulled over and having, you know, a gun pointed in my face by police officers. There's so many times I can't even count the times I've been pulled over, handcuffed, and searched by police, you know, as a young man. And so I think Mary Ann said it best, that we tried to deal with that issue as a part of culture. You know, it's very difficult to, from a policy standpoint, tell somebody you can't pull over Black people or brown people or what have you. But what we can do is make sure that we change the policing culture so that the way that police officers are used to dealing with the community or deal with the community is different. And that we are hopefully hiring officers that have more empathy for people that look different than them. And maybe we hire more people that look like the people that are being contacted by the police. An astonishing statistic is that I think there are only 4% of police officers that are African American in the Fresno Police Department. Yet, you know, yet African Americans, comprise, you know, close to 20% of the contacts in the Fresno Police Department, and only, you know, less than 8% of the population. So, you know, we discussed that issue in the policing culture and the hiring practices in the report. And what and Mary Ann said it best, what we hope to do ultimately is to impact that from who we hire. But it was deeply, deeply traumatic. And I thank you for asking that question. And it's going to have to be a question that it's going to have to be an issue, hopefully that is resolved through a change in culture in policing in Fresno.
I think I'm looking for the word training.
Well,
yeah, well, training too, but it's deeper than training, to be honest with you, because my experience as a police officer is that, you know, if you get a young man or woman who's grown up their whole life, maybe in Clovis, and never really experienced, you know, Black or brown or you know, Asian folks, and then you give them a gun and a badge and they're afraid of people that don't look like them, you can't train that out of them per se, right? We've got to hire people that are used to interacting with people of different cultures and are comfortable with people of different cultures. And so one of the things that I'm hopeful of doing as we get into the implementation work is really getting into the hiring process and from a psychological profile standpoint, we hire officers that are used to dealing with people of different cultures. And we have not done that. You can't necessarily train fear out of someone, of people of different cultures. Some of this are just people who have to have lived life a little bit differently. And I think the police department hasn't done a great job of, you know, at least to date, hasn't done a great job of hiring people that are comfortable with people from different cultures and backgrounds. So we've got to get over that hurdle. Training in and of itself won't solve that.
Howard, I understand you're waving at me. What's your question?
You're muted.
Are you unmuted? Let's see. I'm not sure where he is. Howard, you need to unmute yourself. Can you do that? Okay.
Okay. I think I did it. Did I do it?
You did it. Good job.
Okay. Given that study showed the overwhelming number of people in prison, jails, engaged in antisocial activities had a negative early childhood, especially from conception to age 2, did the commission take any or give any consideration to supporting programs that would make those have positive situations as an investment to reduce crime and need for the police department budget, as big as it is, in a generation or two?
Yes. So In the community development set of recommendations, and although we didn't break out the recommendations necessarily by subcommittee, the Community Development Committee put together a set of recommendations that really encourages a different type of interaction with our residents early on in life. So yes, you have recommendations that definitely deal with youth programs, youth intervention, and a completely different way that police and the community deal with the youth early on. So yes, to answer your question, Howard, you know, the commission actually did deal with that directly.
Thank you.
I'm gonna just forward a question that I could only partially answer. Let me see. Okay, was there any discussion regarding the recommendations with the police union? Was the police union represented? And I know that it was on the commission. Has the union responded to the recommendations?
Well, yeah, so that number, there's a couple of parts to that question. So the first answer is yes. The president of the Fresno Police Officers Association was a member of the commission, and there was several officers, both former and current, that were members of the commission. I don't know if the police commission, I'm sorry, the FPOA, the Fresno Police Officers Association, gave a direct written response to the recommendation. I'm not aware of one if they did, but their position was represented in all of the commission meetings.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, weren't they the one dissenting vote to accepting all of the recommendations?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if the president of the FPOA actually voted ultimately.
Okay.
So I'll keep it at that. I can't remember, and I see Gloria's. Oh, I see. Hey, Gloria. Gloria's a commissioner. Gloria, do you remember if the FPOA, the Todd voted on that? She may be able to help me out. I don't know. I can't remember if he supported.
He voted no. He was the only one that voted no. Everybody.
Okay, well, there you go. I knew Gloria would remember. Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you, Gloria. Let's see, how will the police department evaluate if the community feels there has been an improvement in a year or so? Well, it seems like it's not going to happen for a while if there's this whole implementation process.
Well, some of them will happen quicker than others. So we're hopeful. All of them can't happen at the same time. We were very upfront about that, but we do believe strongly that there are a number of recommendations that can, for instance, the use of force recommendations, we believe can be immediate. These are simply policy changes that we believe strongly that will preserve life in Fresno. So those are recommendations that we think that should be made very quickly. Some of the other ones, you're right, will take a longer time. But what we built into the Community Oversight Board was an annual evaluation piece that actually requires them to talk to the community about how they feel about the police department and some of these recommendations that are implemented. So we try to do our best to institutionalize this interaction and dialogue with the community about the police department and its residents.
I see another question about additions to training police officers, continuing education. I want to insert a comment here. There's a lot of conversation right now about the value of training, and in general, minor reforms which involve training are generally ineffective. That's been the basic idea across the nation. So, things that we hear about, implicit bias training, use of force kind of modification. So I'm personally am a little bit uneasy with those kinds of recommendations. And I think that a change in culture and attention to hiring will make a much bigger difference.
You know, and I would agree, and then offer this as well. What we, I think, really believe strongly in is that there is no one, there's not a silver bullet to changing police culture. It's a number of things you need to do, that you need to continuously do. Training is one of those things, and one of the problems with some of the trainings that happen in policing culture is they're done by other police officers. So one of the recommendations that we made was not having police officers do all the training. Have some of this training, particularly when it comes to implicit bias and other sensitive issues regarding, critical race theory and what have you, that are not done by policing agencies, that are done by, civilians, as it were. So, we think that some of that, accompanied with a change in hiring, going from, warrior to guardian mentality when you're looking at who you hire, are some of the long-term cultural changes that are going to be beneficial. But it won't be one thing, Marianne. It's going to be a number of things that they do that we hopefully we institutionalize over time that will change the culture. And we just want to do a number of things to get to that point.
Catherine says some of the recommendations around oversight are tied to changes in the contract between the city and the Fresno Police Department. The city begins negotiations around approximately March 1st. How can we support the commission's work to make sure the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, is changed to align with the police commission's recommendations?
I think the best way to support that is to reach out to the mayor's office. So, obviously making sure that the mayor knows what the priorities of the community are as they negotiate with the FPOA and their pending contract is going to be important. I think all the years I was a police officer and even as a council member, I don't remember the community weighing in on areas that they thought were important for the FPOA MOU. I think if the community were to get involved in that, were to register areas of concern and or support, I think it would be a place where the administration could be influenced, and at least we can make sure that the administration is held accountable for that. So I would encourage them to reach out to your council members, and the council members ultimately decide the vote on the MOU. Make sure your council members know, and make sure the mayor's office knows what the concerns are and where you want to make sure things that are applicable to the MOU, the FPOA, as it concerns the recommendations are brought up.
Janet has a question dealing with training while in the police academy and continuing education for existing officers. Is there any discussion of internship hours like other professions such as medical and mental health areas?
We didn't deal with the police academy directly. Now, funny enough, while our commission was going on, Fresno, the Fresno City College had its own review of the police academy and came out with a number of recommendations. Some of those recommendations, funny enough, overlap with ours. Dr. Goldsmith and I, talked frequently about that. So I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to do some alignment of the training that happens in the police academy and what we have in the policing agency. So that definitely is possible. And there's the will to do it as well.
Gloria adds, there's pending legislation to make all cops get a degree and not be hired out of high school. Right. Let's see. I don't know if I've missed any questions. I guess Francine's asking about the implementation committee, and I have that same question. So I think that question needs to go to the mayor's office. Are there any other questions that I've missed? I'm going to just scan through here in case somebody's like waving at me.
Perhaps Oliver has some knowledge about the timeline for the implementation committee.
You know, it's funny. I was just asked that question today, and I don't. So I have made myself available to the mayor's office and the council. They have assured me that they are going to make this a matter of priority. The mayor's administration has asked for a little bit of time. As obviously just been in office. Being sworn in for maybe a month now. So. I'm gonna be understanding and patient, but I can tell you that if in a few weeks we don't have some movement on that, I'll be personally calling the council and the mayor myself.
I think one thing that we could take away from this was a lesson on community involvement, because we just don't see the creation of this kind of community input for very many issues. And I know that from a league point of view, we certainly would advocate for that. And we see the value of that, though I just can't imagine the difficult job it was to herd all those people and actually come up with a product.
It was, Mariana, I'll tell you, I would never do that again. It was incredibly difficult. I probably underestimated how tough it would be. But however, in saying that, I think it was a model of how community engagement and commissions should be. So it is hard work. It should be hard work. And that while I have my reservations, as a matter of fact, the council wanted me to limit the commission to 20 people. And I'm gonna be honest with you, Marianne, I told them early on, I said, I think that we should let this commission be as large as we want it to be. It was such a unique time in history. And people were calling and emailing me, residents of our community, wanting to contribute. And they wanted to contribute for all the right reasons, right? They wanted to be a part of something because they knew it was a historic moment. And for that reason alone, I told the council, anyone who wants to be a part of this should have the opportunity to be a part of it and to let their voice be heard, particularly if they, and I made sure the commissioners knew the level of commitment that it would take up front. I said, listen, it's going to be a lot of work. And they rose to the occasion and even surprised me in their level of dedication. So I think that this should be a model for how all commissions are, done in Fresno. Anyone who wanted to be a part of, we let them contribute to this really, really historic discussion. So, although I personally wouldn't do it again. So, but I think it should be a model.
Kay is asking, just going back to the MOU with the police union, what features of the MOU might be the most important with respect to the recommendations?
I don't know. And I'll tell you why. I was really adamant about not integrating the MOU discussion in our discussion. Because an MOU, and I'm going to tell you why, I really wanted to focus on things that would change the institution and the culture of policing. MOUs don't do that just because they're done every couple of years. MOUs change every couple of years, and I didn't want short-lived changes. I wanted these changes to outlast and outlive MOUs. I was hopeful that the recommendations that we put in place would become the, part of the working fabric of the agencies. Now, it's not going to be 100%, right? We weren't 100% successful in that. Some of them are going to have to be a function of MOU, but that was not the overall goal, is to focus on the MOU. We were much more looking for much longer lasting changes. So a lot of the recommendations are not necessarily tied to the MOU.
I have one question from Diane. If ride-alongs with police officers are part of the training or recruiting of new police officers, how are the officers doing who are doing the ride-alongs selected? So I guess, and that's a question about who's mentoring who, what officers are being chosen to mentor new hires?
Well, as it, and I guess we're talking about the training programs, and there are
Right.
training officers. So there are officers that are selected to be training officers. They go through an extensive amount of training to then train other officers.
Okay. I just want to scan the group one more time if there are any other questions. If not, let me just share a thought from Gloria, who would like to give a shout out to Ellie Bluestein, who recently passed away and who was part of a perpetual community effort to try to get community oversight of the police. So yeah, if this happens, what a tribute to her years of effort in that regard.
Yep, well said, Gloria. And we agree, and Gloria too. And I don't want to wind this call down without acknowledging personally the contribution of Gloria, not only on this commission, but for all her years of fighting for police accountability in our community. So Gloria sat on my subcommittee as well as the commission, and she was extremely influential in helping to shape some of these recommendations. And Gloria, I know I've told you this personally, but I really, really appreciated your longstanding effort, not just the 120 days on the commission, but the decades of service that you put into this community. So I think it was a great moment for Gloria personally as well, to see a lot of the things that she's advocated for come to fruition. And I don't want to say it's a perfect document. There are a lot of things that we didn't do, but I think for a lot of folks that have been in this space for a long time, they actually saw the needle move.
Gloria, you have a comment? Unmute yourself.
I just want to say it was a very interesting commission.
I'm almost
very interesting. The committee we were on, there was 3 of us and the rest were mostly cops or ex-cops. And we got a lot across because they were willing to listen. And because we were prepared. We had a research committee of volunteers that put a lot of paperwork together, and we did the proposals and went in and negotiated, just like negotiating a union contract in a way. But it was really interesting. The years that I spent working with Ellie have made me strong, but also wise. But also carrying the spirits of the stolen lives within me. I will stand strong, but I was very grateful to see that the cops were willing to meet us halfway. Our recommendations were not welcome in the beginning, but when they listened, they understood where we were coming from. One of the things that I was real concerned about was the amount of time it takes for a cop to get an answer when someone complains against him. Sometimes those cases drag for years. And I said, get us some more IA. They shouldn't have to suffer like that. So I guess finally people understand that I'm not anti-cop. I'm only anti-bad cop. But I really appreciate the work that Oliver and Sandra and everybody else put into it. I think that we came a long way, decades of trying to reach something. And I think it's going to happen. I really feel it this time. And I certainly hope it happens before the end of my lifetime.
Thank you, Gloria. And many thanks to you, Oliver, for really articulating, the purpose and the function and the problems. And we do appreciate your hard work and that of the committee. So we look forward to a better future. I'm hopeful, and I think our calls now have to go to the mayor's office.
Well, thank you, Marianne, and to the entire League of Women Voters. I am honored to have had the opportunity to chat with you all. Your questions were extremely thoughtful and well prepared. And if you ever need me to come back in the future, I'd be happy to do it, to give you guys periodic updates, if you want, on where I see this work going. But I remain hopeful. I'm what they call an incurable optimist. So I remain hopeful that this work is going to be implemented, and we are going to be proud of the work that our residents did on behalf of the entire community on the commission.
Thank you. And just a quick plug for a couple of upcoming league events. On February 17th, Clovis City Council Candidates Conversation. And February 23rd, really important league members. That's our program planning meeting, and that's the ground level where we start to decide what we're going to work on. And in fact, police reform is one of the considered priorities for the upcoming year. So we hope to see you soon, and thanks for joining us this evening.